Were those forgotten summer recipes really too good to forget, yet still lost along the way? Summer recipes once meant backyard laughter, melting ice cream, and dishes that defined family gatherings. What does it say about us that we let them quietly fade? Chow chow relish was one of those bright, tangy sides that seemed to appear on every summer table, even if people forgot where it first came from. Made from a mix of chopped vegetables like cabbage, peppers, onions, and sometimes green tomatoes, it was simmered down with vinegar, sugar, and spices until it became a sweet-sour condiment that could keep for weeks. Families canned it in big jars so they would have some on hand long after the harvest was over. At barbecues, it was spooned over hot dogs, hamburgers, or beans, instantly waking up the flavors. At home, it found its way into sandwiches or as a topping for simple dishes like cornbread. It was the kind of thrifty recipe that made use of whatever produce was left from the garden. Nothing wasted. Everything transformed. For kids, the taste was sharp but memorable, linking it forever to family cookouts and long evenings outside. Today, jars of chow chow are rarely seen in kitchens, yet for many, that first tangy bite brings back memories of community tables and sharing food with neighbors. It was more than relish. It was summer, preserved in a spoonful. Peach ice cream pie was a cooling treat that could turn the hottest day into something special, and families made it when peaches were ripe and ice cream was a rare indulgence. The recipe often started with canned peaches, sliced and layered into a graham cracker crust that was pressed together with butter and sugar. On top went softened vanilla ice cream, spread smoothly until it filled the crust, and sometimes a swirl of whipped topping for extra lightness. The whole pie was tucked into the freezer, transforming into a chilled dessert that could be sliced like cake. At picnics, when coolers were opened and slices of peach ice cream pie appeared, it felt like luxury without being expensive. It was also clever because it avoided baking, making it perfect for hot kitchens in the summer months. Families would take pride in serving it to guests, knowing it looked beautiful and tasted refreshing without much fuss. For children, the creamy sweetness combined with the burst of peach flavor was unforgettable. Bologna salad sandwich spread may not sound glamorous, but it was once a trusted standby for quick summer lunches, especially when budgets were tight. Bologna was inexpensive and widely available, and families stretched it further by grinding it up and mixing it with mayonnaise, chopped pickles, and sometimes mustard or onions. The result was a creamy, tangy spread that was spooned generously between slices of white bread or onto crackers for gatherings. It showed up at picnics because it could be made ahead and chilled, ready to feed a crowd without much trouble. The taste was simple but comforting, reminding people of lunchboxes, roadside stops, and family reunions. It also symbolized thrift, proving that even the most basic meat could become something worth sharing when dressed up with common pantry staples. Many children grew up with the memory of opening lunch bags to find these sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a reminder of a parent's care. Cornbread salad was the kind of layered dish that surprised people with how hearty and colorful it turned out. It started with leftover cornbread crumbled into a bowl or dish, then layered with beans, bell peppers, onions, tomatoes, and shredded cheese. Each layer was carefully spread so that when served, the salad looked like a trifle, only savory instead of sweet. A creamy dressing, often made with mayonnaise or sour cream, was spooned over the top to hold everything together. It was a popular dish for potlucks because it looked impressive, fed many, and used up ingredients that were already on hand. Families passed recipes down through cookbooks or word of mouth, each version a little different depending on the pantry. It carried the taste of the South, where cornbread was already a staple, and turned it into something festive enough for gatherings. For some, the flavor combination of crumbly bread, crisp vegetables, and creamy topping became the taste of summer get-togethers. Though it has slipped away from most tables, it once represented the creativity of homemakers making something new from familiar staples. Cucumber cream cheese finger sandwiches were once a staple of garden parties, church socials, and luncheons where something light and cooling was called for. Thin slices of soft white bread were spread with a layer of cream cheese or herbed spread, then filled with crisp cucumber slices cut as thin as possible. The crusts were trimmed away, and the sandwiches cut into neat triangles or rectangles, making them easy to serve on trays. They weren't just food, they were a symbol of refinement and care, even when made with very simple ingredients. During hot summers, they were a refreshing option when heavier foods felt out of place. Children often encountered them at weddings or community teas, where the grown-ups shared elegant bites that looked far removed from everyday meals. The cool cucumber with creamy cheese made a combination that was delicate yet satisfying. Today, they've mostly disappeared except in a few traditional settings, but for those who grew up with them, the sight alone brings back memories of polished tables and neighbors gathered for special occasions. Frozen strawberry pretzel dessert was one of those dishes that could stop a potluck table in its tracks because it combined sweet, salty, creamy, and crunchy in one bite. The base was a crust of crushed pretzels mixed with butter and sugar, baked until crisp. On top of that went a cream cheese and whipped topping layer, smooth and tangy. The final layer was strawberries mixed with gelatin, poured over and chilled until firm. Slices revealed the red fruit against white filling and brown crust, making it as pretty as it was delicious. It was refreshing, playful, and perfectly suited to warm weather. Families loved how it balanced richness with lightness, making it stand out among cakes and pies. It traveled well in pans, which is why it became a mainstay at church socials and reunions. Many children's first memory of it is sneaking back for a second square because the salty pretzel base was irresistible with the strawberry topping. Though not common anymore, it remains an example of mid-century creativity where ordinary pantry items came together in unforgettable ways. It was summer sweetness with a twist of salt. Ritz Cracker Mock Apple Pie was a clever Depression-era trick that lingered in kitchens for decades because it astonished people with its flavor. The recipe called for Ritz crackers layered in a pie crust, then covered with a syrup made of sugar, lemon juice, and cinnamon. When baked, the crackers softened into layers that resembled apples in both taste and texture. It fooled countless guests who swore it was apple pie, even though no apples were inside. During hard times, when fruit was expensive or unavailable, this pie gave families the joy of dessert without the cost. Later, it became something of a novelty dish, appearing at potlucks and picnics where it sparked conversation. Children marveled at the idea that crackers could turn into pie filling. Adults appreciated the thrift and ingenuity it represented, a memory of making do with little. Though it seems odd now, it once embodied the spirit of resourcefulness that defined entire generations. Mock apple pie wasn't just dessert. It was proof that a little creativity could sweeten life even in the hardest years. Pickled watermelon. Rind turned what was usually thrown away into something treasured at summer tables. Families cut away the green skin and used the pale white rind, slicing it into pieces that were simmered in a vinegar and sugar brine with spices like cinnamon or cloves. The result was a tangy, sweet-sour pickle that added brightness to heavy meals. It was served alongside barbecue, fried chicken, or beans, offering a sharp contrast to the richness of those foods. The recipe was born out of thrift, ensuring nothing went to waste, but it became beloved for its unique taste. Many children remember tasting it at grandparents' houses, curious about eating part of the fruit they never thought of as edible. Jars of pickled rind filled pantry shelves, glowing with golden syrup and spices. Today, it has largely vanished from modern cooking, but those who had it remember its crisp bite and unusual sweetness. It symbolized a time when families stretched food as far as possible, creating treats from scraps. Pickled watermelon rind was proof that thrift could become tradition, and tradition could taste like summer. Cabbage and ramen slaw was a crunchy, colorful dish that first made its way into American kitchens in the 1980s, when ramen noodles became cheap and widely available. Shredded cabbage was tossed with broken dry ramen noodles, sunflower seeds, green onions, and a sesame-flavored dressing. The noodles softened slightly while keeping some crunch, creating a texture that felt new and exciting. It became a popular dish for potlucks because it was affordable, easy to make, and different from the usual mayonnaise-based salads. Families loved how the nutty dressing paired with the crisp cabbage, and it often disappeared quickly at gatherings. Children sometimes picked out the noodles first, treating them like a snack, while adults praised the freshness of the whole dish. It represented the era's willingness to experiment with pantry staples and international flavors in simple ways. Though it doesn't appear as often today, it remains a nostalgic memory for those who remember their mothers or aunts making it for summer reunions. Cabbage and ramen slaw was a symbol of creativity in an age of convenience. Pineapple upside-down cake was the showpiece of many summer gatherings, its glossy rings of pineapple and bright red cherries turning every slice into a piece of art. It began with pineapple slices arranged neatly in the bottom of a pan, topped with maraschino cherries and sprinkled with brown sugar. Cake batter was poured over, and when baked and flipped, the caramelized fruit sat proudly on top. The golden, sticky surface made the dessert as eye-catching as it was delicious. It became a symbol of hospitality, something a hostess could serve with pride to family and friends. The combination of sweet pineapple, chewy cherries, and fluffy cake was tropical and festive, making it especially suited to warm months. For many children, it was the first fancy cake they saw baked at home, a dessert that looked far harder to make than it really was. Today, it is seen less often, but it once held a central place at summer cookouts and holiday picnics. Pineapple upside-down cake was a dish that brought smiles before anyone even tasted it, and its memory is as bright as its colors. Grape salad with sour cream was a chilled treat that balanced sweetness with a tangy edge, making it a memorable summer favorite. Clusters of grapes were tossed in sour cream, then sprinkled with brown sugar that melted into a glossy topping. Sometimes a handful of pecans or walnuts was added for crunch, turning it into something more than fruit salad. It was simple enough to make in minutes, yet it felt special enough to bring to church gatherings or picnics. The cold grapes burst with juice against the creamy coating, a texture that was both refreshing and indulgent. Families often prepared it ahead and pulled it straight from the refrigerator when guests arrived, a convenient option during hot days. For children, it was often the first time they experienced fruit dressed up in such an unusual way. Though rarely seen today, grape salad once carried the charm of turning humble fruit into a conversation piece that cooled the table. Baked bean casserole with hot dogs was the kind of dish that defined casual cookouts, combining sweetness, smokiness, and heartiness in one pan. Canned baked beans were poured into a casserole dish, sliced hot dogs laid over the top, and sometimes onions or brown sugar were added before baking. The beans thickened in the oven, the hot dogs browned slightly, and the flavors mingled into a meal that was as satisfying as it was simple. It was loved by parents because it was inexpensive and filled everyone up quickly. For children, it was fun to dig in and find hot dog pieces hidden in the beans, a little treasure in every spoonful. Families often made it when large groups gathered since it stretched easily and tasted even better reheated the next day. Today, it feels like a relic, but it once symbolized summer nights spent outdoors with smoky grills nearby and everyone gathered around a picnic table. Frozen lemon soufflé was one of those desserts that seemed fancy but was actually wonderfully simple, making it a summertime favorite. Lemon juice and zest gave it brightness, while eggs and sugar were whipped until airy and folded together with cream. Instead of baking, the mixture was spooned into molds or ramekins and tucked into the freezer until firm. When served, the soufflé held its shape with a frosty texture that melted on the tongue. It was a dessert that cooled both the air and the mood on sweltering days. Hostesses loved bringing it out because it impressed guests without requiring the heat of an oven. The flavor was tart but refreshing, a perfect balance to heavier meals. For many children, it was their first taste of something that felt elegant, almost like restaurant food at home. Though forgotten in most kitchens now, frozen lemon soufflé was once a symbol of creativity and sophistication in hot weather desserts. Chilled beet and onion salad was a simple dish that delivered bright color and sharp flavor to summer tables. Sliced beets, either fresh or canned, were marinated with thinly sliced onions in a vinegar dressing. The result was tangy and slightly sweet, the onions softening in the liquid while the beets kept their earthy taste. It was easy to prepare ahead of time, making it popular for picnics, cookouts, and reunions where dishes needed to be portable. Families stored jars of it in the refrigerator, pulling it out as a side to balance heavier meats and casseroles. It became a reliable way to add freshness to a spread, and its vibrant color made it stand out on plates. For children, it was sometimes a dish they wrinkled their noses at, but grew to appreciate with age. Though it has faded from everyday cooking, this salad once carried the spirit of resourceful summer meals made with garden vegetables. Corn pudding was a creamy dish that combined the sweetness of corn with the richness of custard, creating a side that worked for both everyday suppers and special gatherings. Fresh or canned corn was mixed with milk, eggs, butter, and a little flour or cornstarch before being baked until just set. The result was golden on top, soft and spoonable inside, with bursts of corn kernels in every bite. It often appeared at summer dinners when corn was plentiful, offering a way to use up extra ears from the garden. Families loved it because it was affordable, filling, and comforting without being heavy. For children, the texture was like a cross between pudding and casserole, making it a dish they remembered long after. At potlucks, corn pudding always drew praise, especially when served warm alongside barbecue or roasted meats. It has slipped into obscurity today, but it once stood as a summer classic with homely charm and sweet flavor. Cucumber gelatin salad was one of those quirky mid-century recipes that felt unusual but refreshing at summer gatherings. Cucumbers were pured and blended into lime or lemon gelatin, then molded into rings or decorative shapes. The result was a cool, savory salad with a gentle sweetness that balanced heavier dishes. It was often served with a dollop of sour cream or mayonnaise on the side, adding creaminess to the bright flavor. Families made it ahead, chilled it overnight, and proudly unveiled it at church socials or holiday spreads. Its pale green color made it stand out, a centerpiece as much as a side dish. For children, it was sometimes confusing. Gelatin usually meant dessert, but they remembered its unique taste. Today, it may sound odd, but for those who grew up with it, cucumber gelatin salad was a sign of creativity in an era that loved experimenting with molds and turning simple vegetables into something striking for the table. Pineapple carrot gelatin rings combined sweet and savory elements into a molded salad that was once considered stylish at luncheons and parties. Grated carrots and crushed pineapple were stirred into orange or lemon gelatin, poured into decorative molds, and chilled until firm. The result was a bright, colorful dish that sliced neatly into portions, each piece sparkling with fruit and vegetable. It was served alongside meats or sandwiches, providing a refreshing contrast in flavor and texture. Families liked it because it was affordable, quick to prepare, and used ingredients that were almost always on hand. For children, the sweet pineapple made it appealing, even if the carrot added surprise. Hostesses enjoyed presenting it because it looked festive without requiring complicated cooking. Though rarely made today, it once stood as a cheerful example of how even ordinary ingredients could be transformed into something that looked impressive and tasted light. Pineapple carrot gelatin rings reflected a playful approach to summer dining. Old-fashioned cobbler with canned fruit was a dessert that made the most of pantry staples while still feeling homemade and comforting. Families poured canned peaches, cherries, or blackberries into a baking dish, sprinkled sugar and spices, then topped it with a simple biscuit dough or batter. As it baked, the fruit bubbled up around the golden crust, filling kitchens with sweet aromas. It was often served warm with ice cream or whipped topping, making it a highlight of summer meals. The beauty of this cobbler was its simplicity. It could be assembled quickly and fed a crowd with little effort. For children, spooning into the hot, syrupy filling was pure delight. It became a staple at potlucks, where every family had their own variation and stories tied to it. Though fresh fruit versions exist, the canned fruit cobbler represented convenience, resourcefulness, and tradition. It was proof that even shelf-stable ingredients could bring warmth and joy to the table. Icebox. Eclair cake was a no-bake dessert that offered the richness of bakery treats without needing an oven. Layers of graham crackers were stacked with vanilla pudding or custard between them. creating a cake-like texture as the crackers softened overnight. The whole dessert was finished with a chocolate glaze or frosting, giving it the look of an eclair in sliceable form. Families loved making it in summer because it was cool, easy, and didn't heat up the kitchen. It traveled well too, making it a favorite for potlucks, reunions, or picnics where refrigeration was available. For children, it was a thrilling discovery that something so simple could taste like a pastry shop dessert. Adults appreciated its thrift, since it required only basic pantry items. Today, it rarely appears at gatherings, but in its heyday, it was a sweet surprise that impressed guests. Icebox eclair cake was proof that cleverness could deliver elegance without cost or complication. Stuffed bell peppers with rice were a lighter summer version of the classic comfort dish, filling colorful peppers with seasoned rice, tomatoes, and sometimes bits of ground meat. The peppers softened as they baked, turning tender while holding their shape like little edible bowls. The filling absorbed the juices, creating a flavorful mixture that was both hearty and fresh. Families loved serving them because they looked impressive on a plate and stretched a small amount of ingredients into a complete meal. For children, it was fun to scoop the filling out with a spoon before tackling the pepper itself. They often appeared at family dinners or church suppers, where trays of stuffed peppers could feed many. Today, they have been replaced by quicker meals, but their memory lingers with those who recall their bright colors and satisfying taste. Stuffed bell peppers with rice were a reminder of how garden vegetables became the heart of simple, nourishing dinners. Pickled okra was one of those southern traditions that carried the flavor of summer far past the harvest. Families gathered baskets of fresh okra pods, trimming and packing them tightly into jars with vinegar, garlic, dill, and a mix of spices. The brine turned the okra crisp and tangy with a faint heat that made it irresistible as a snack. It was a thrifty way to preserve what the garden offered, but it became more than preservation. It was a taste people looked forward to year after year. Jars lined pantry shelves, ready to be pulled out when guests arrived or when something crunchy was needed beside barbecue. Some people loved it straight from the jar, while others paired it with sandwiches or platters of cold cuts. Children often wrinkled their noses at first, only to discover its addictive bite. Today, it's less common to see in kitchens, but for many, it represents community canning days and hot afternoons filled with laughter and jars sealing tight. Ham and pineapple kebabs were the kind of simple but festive food that seemed to belong at every backyard barbecue. Cubes of salty ham alternated with chunks of sweet pineapple on skewers, sometimes brushed with a glaze of honey or brown sugar. As they grilled, the pineapple caramelized, and the ham picked up smoky char, creating a combination that was both savory and sweet. They were easy to assemble and served as both appetizer and main dish, making them perfect for gatherings where grills stayed busy all day. Families loved how colorful they looked on platters, and children found them fun to eat straight from the stick. The recipe also reflected the mid-century fascination with tropical flavors, bringing a taste of the islands to American suburbs. Today, they're not as common, but they once symbolized celebration, summer, and playful cooking. Each bite carried the flavor of sunshine mixed with smoke, a reminder of summers filled with music, laughter, and glowing coals. Cold spaghetti salad was born from the need to stretch leftovers into something refreshing and new, and it quickly became a staple at picnics. Leftover noodles were rinsed, tossed with Italian dressing, and combined with chopped vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers. Sometimes cubes of cheese or olives were added, giving the dish more flavor and texture. The salad was served straight from the refrigerator, offering cool relief on hot days. Families loved it because it was inexpensive, filling, and adaptable to whatever was on hand. It became popular in the 70s and 80s, when convenience foods and make-ahead recipes thrived. Children often enjoyed the tangy flavor, while adults appreciated how easily it could feed a crowd. It was a dish that traveled well to church basements, reunions, and park picnics, often served in colorful plastic bowls with matching spoons. Though it has faded from modern tables, cold spaghetti salad remains a reminder of how resourcefulness and flavor could turn leftovers into tradition. Frozen key. Lime dessert squares offered cool refreshment when ovens were too hot to use. Crushed graham crackers formed the crust, pressed firm and chilled. A mixture of condensed milk, lime juice, and whipped topping was poured over, creating a creamy filling that balanced tartness with sweetness. Once frozen, it was cut into neat squares, making it easy to serve at potlucks or family dinners. The flavor was bright, citrusy, and perfect for hot weather, leaving behind a clean finish that begged for another bite. Families treasured the recipe because it required little effort but delivered impressive results. It was also flexible, sometimes topped with extra whipped cream or garnished with lime slices to look more festive. Children loved the tangy sweet taste, while adults praised its lightness after heavy meals. Though rarely seen now, it once carried the spirit of summer with every frosty slice. Frozen key lime squares remain a nostalgic reminder of desserts that cooled both the body and the soul. Stuffed celery sticks were one of the simplest yet most beloved snacks that appeared at picnics and parties. Crisp celery stalks were cut into short pieces and filled with spreads like cream cheese, peanut butter, or pimento cheese. The crunch of the celery paired perfectly with the creamy or savory fillings, making them both refreshing and satisfying. They were easy for children to help prepare, which made them a popular family activity. Packed into lunchboxes, they offered a cool, crisp bite in the middle of the day. At gatherings, trays of stuffed celery appeared alongside crackers, pickles, and olives, completing snack platters that welcomed guests. They were practical, inexpensive, and endlessly adaptable, proving that even humble vegetables could feel like treats. Children often loved the peanut butter version best, while adults gravitated toward pimento or cream cheese. Though rarely seen today, stuffed celery once symbolized thrift and creativity, bringing fresh garden produce into playful, shareable snacks that brightened tables and fueled conversation. Coconut cream pie was a silky dessert that spoke of indulgence, especially in the long, warm evenings of summer. A flaky crust held a filling of custard enriched with coconut milk or flakes, simmered until thick and poured in smooth. On top went mounds of whipped cream sprinkled with toasted coconut, adding both texture and beauty. Families saved it for special occasions, often refrigerating it until just before serving to keep it cool and luscious. The flavor was tropical and rich, a welcome surprise at reunions or church socials. For children, the creamy texture and sweet coconut made it unforgettable. Adults admired how elegant it looked on a dessert table, especially when cut into neat slices. It was also a dish that reflected changing tastes, with coconut once considered exotic in mid-century America. Though fewer people make it from scratch today, it remains a classic symbol of summer hospitality. Coconut cream pie was luxury in a pie tin, proof that cooling desserts could still feel extravagant. Zucchini bread was the kind of recipe that turned a garden surplus into something sweet and comforting. Grated zucchini was folded into batter with cinnamon, nutmeg, sugar, and nuts, baked into moist loaves that stayed fresh for days. Families baked several at once, often wrapping extras in foil to share with neighbors or freeze for later. It was a clever way to use up vegetables that grew faster than they could be eaten, disguising them in a dessert-like form that even children enjoyed. The bread became a fixture at bake sales and community potlucks, where slices disappeared quickly from plates. For many, it carried the scent of late summer kitchens filled with spices and the warmth of ovens. It wasn't flashy, but it was dependable, a quiet pleasure that felt wholesome and generous. Today, zucchini bread remains nostalgic for those who grew up in households where nothing from the garden went to waste. It was resourcefulness baked into a loaf, carrying both thrift and sweetness in every slice. Mock chicken legs were a quirky but beloved dish that turned simple ground meat into something playful for family suppers. Ground pork, beef, or veal was seasoned, molded onto skewers to resemble drumsticks, then breaded and fried until golden. The result looked like chicken legs but offered a different taste entirely. They were especially popular in the 60s when novelty in food presentation delighted families and guests alike. Children loved holding the skewers and pretending they were eating real chicken legs, while adults admired the creativity behind the recipe. It was an economical dish, stretching cheaper meats into something festive and filling. At potlucks, trays of mock chicken legs often vanished quickly because they were easy to grab and eat. Though largely forgotten now, they once reflected an era where fun and thrift blended seamlessly at the dinner table. Mock chicken legs were proof that presentation could elevate even the simplest ingredients into something worth celebrating. Fried green tomatoes were a seasonal treasure that made use of unripe tomatoes before they had time to ripen. Slices were dipped in cornmeal and flour, then fried in hot oil until golden and crisp. The outside was crunchy, while the inside stayed tender, offering a tangy bite unlike ripe tomatoes. They were especially popular in the South, where gardens overflowed in summer and wasting food was unthinkable. Families served them as sides for breakfast with eggs, at lunch with sandwiches, or at dinner alongside meats. Children grew up remembering the sound of sizzling slices and the taste of salt sprinkled on top. Adults appreciated the thrift and practicality of turning unripe produce into something delicious. Though they've faded from many modern menus, fried green tomatoes remain tied to warm evenings, screened porches, and cast-iron skillets passed down through generations. They were summer resourcefulness made delicious, a crisp reminder of gardens and kitchens that valued every stage of the harvest. Homemade root beer floats were more than a drink. They were an event that brought families together in the summer. Root beer was brewed at home using yeast, sugar, and extract, giving it a foamy, slightly wild flavor unlike bottled soda. Poured over scoops of vanilla ice cream, it frothed up into a creamy, sweet concoction that felt both refreshing and indulgent. Families often made batches for picnics, bringing jugs of chilled root beer packed in ice. Children watched in delight as the ice cream bubbled and melted into swirls, making each sip a little different. Adults found comfort in the nostalgic taste that recalled simpler times. It wasn't just dessert. It was a celebration of creativity and patience, with homemade soda that felt personal. Today, store-bought floats still exist, but the ritual of brewing root beer at home has mostly disappeared. Homemade root beer floats once captured summer in a glass, fizzing with laughter, flavor, and togetherness in every sip. Barbecue potato chip burgers were the kind of summer meal that only made sense once you took the first bite. It was not enough to just toss a burger on the grill. Families in the 70s took things a step further by crushing barbecue-flavored potato chips right on top of their burgers. The chips added a smoky, salty crunch that gave your average burger a whole new personality. It was the perfect marriage of snack food and backyard classic, and everyone wanted a bite. You would see them at neighborhood barbecues, little league fundraisers, and beach cookouts, basically anywhere families were stretching their grocery budget and still trying to impress the crowd. Chips were cheap, burgers were filling, and throwing them together was pure cookout creativity. Somewhere along the way, though, this crunchy burger disappeared, replaced by gourmet toppings and complicated recipes. But there is something about barbecue chip crumbs on a juicy burger that feels like peak summer nostalgia. It might be messy, but it sure makes you wonder why we stopped making them. Mock chicken legs, better known as city chicken, were a Depression-era idea that stuck around. You took cubes of pork or veal, skewered them, rolled them in flour, egg, and breadcrumbs, then fried or baked them until golden. The idea was to mimic fried chicken legs when chicken cost too much. And you know what? It worked. Cookbooks from the 1940s through the 1970s printed this recipe again and again. In summer, these skewers were served with slaw or cucumbers, something cool to balance the heat. You could reheat them or pack them for a picnic. A pound or two of meat could feed a full family. For families in cities where meat came from the butcher, not a backyard coop, this recipe was gold. It looked like a feast, even if it was scraps. Today, you hardly see city chicken, but people who remember it still say it tasted better than the real thing. This is the quick meal you want to fix for yourself on days you don't feel like cooking. Beans and Franks combines baked beans with sliced hot dogs into a delicious meal. Historically, beans and Franks became famous as a convenience food, and ads in the 1970s sold it as a quick and filling meal that was perfect for busy households. The canned beans provided a sweet, tangy base, while the hot dogs added a smoky touch. Do you know how amazing a meal has to be to have a day named after it? That is right. July 13th is the National Beans and Franks Day, although that is not the exact day its inventor, Frank Van Camp, decided to mix pork and beans in tomato sauce. To whip up a batch, you'll need a can of baked beans and several hot dogs. Simply slice the hot dogs into bite-sized pieces, mix them into the beans, and heat the mixture on the stove until everything is hot and the flavors meld together. I just know it'll taste so good, just like this corn chowder, the perfect evening food. Southern Soul chili is pretty much exactly what you'd expect that to taste like. You put the words Southern Soul and chili together, and you paint a pretty colorful picture of the Southwest and Texas potlucks. The evolution of this dish is actually pretty closely rooted in Native American, Mexican, and Spanish cultures, though. Over time, it's begun to involve all kinds of things, like beef and chili peppers and even tomatoes and beans. The beans were a pretty new addition, because it wasn't until the Depression that people began to use pinto beans and kidney beans. Even black-eyed beans were things that people took to a lot. Southern soul chili in general was a unique spin that drew a lot of its style from soul food staples and a lot of its flavors from Southern cuisine. You had the chili and the focus on natural ingredients, which was something you'd get from soul food. Still, the smoked meats and sweet potatoes were unmistakable. That was a Southern classic if I've ever seen one. Where else do you see that much smoked brisket being used? Or that much pulled pork? Either way, this makes for one really explosive chili, so try it at your own risk. Scalloped chicken casserole. Here's another classic casserole that deserves a comeback. This dish is the perfect example of simple but mouth-watering good. I mean, just imagine tender chicken pieces in a creamy sauce, seasoned to perfection, and layered with fluffy breadcrumbs. I think I'm feeling hungry now. Scalloped chicken casserole is a great way to use up leftover chicken, and it's perfect for a quick and easy weeknight meal. Not to mention, it's a dish that's sure to please even the pickiest eaters. Who can resist creamy chicken and crispy breadcrumbs? Ditch your takeout menus for a night and take a trip down memory lane by giving this casserole a try. You can find dozens of recipes on the internet, and it won't take you hours to whip up. Trust me, your taste buds will thank you. Another thing that people relied on rather frequently was cornmeal mush. I can't begin to tell you how much people loved cornmeal. From peasants to farmers to Native Americans and everybody in between the West and East, cornmeal was something that had really spread. It was like that one food of the nation that everyone just knew. Corn is one of the few things that grows as easily as it does in the United States, and it means that the potential for mass use is so strong. Cornmeal mush might not do well by today's standards because it's a rustic, simple dish, but back then this mush was enough to make your morning a bit more optimistically. When a lot of people had nothing else to eat, they would often turn to cornmeal. When people had no way of stretching their pantries until the next salary, there was little to go for. Corn was one of the few things people could make in 100 different ways, and it was virtually free or literally free if you had your own farming grounds. Americans thought it was better with ducks. The use of berries and fruits is definitely something I'm not used to, though, and I don't think a lot of people are. Many tribes like the Cherokee and Lenape would use dried cranberries and choke cherries in a fair amount of recipes, but in terms of stuffed duck, it was always used to add a bit of an extra sweetness to it. I think the most difficult part of this might be just managing the bird, because Native Americans would roast the duck whole. This is obviously something we aren't really used to, but if you really want to get authentic with it, you should try cooking it over an open fire. This ensured a lot more even cooking, and the meat would get really tender on the inside, besides just having a slightly smokier flavor. And that's never a bad thing. Grilled Bologna and cheese melts on Texas toast were the kind of summer cookout food that felt fancy, even though everyone knew it was just dressed-up pantry staples. You would take thick slices of Texas toast, pile on bologna and plenty of cheese, and toss the whole thing on the grill until it turned golden, bubbly, and melty. It was smoky, crispy, cheesy comfort food that somehow belonged at every backyard party. Back in the 60s and 70s, this was a cookout staple, especially when families were stretching budgets but still wanted a meal that looked impressive. Bologna was affordable, cheese made everything better, and Texas toast gave it that hearty diner-style vibe people loved. These open-faced melts were easy to whip up for a crowd, perfect for stacking on paper plates next to potato salad and chips. But somewhere along the line, Bologna fell out of favor, and these cheesy grilled melts quietly disappeared from summer menus. Which is a shame, because nothing hits like melty cheese and smoky Bologna on buttery Texas toast. Bologna salad sandwich plates were the quiet champions of summer dinners when the fridge was nearly empty, but you still needed something that felt like a meal. You would take Bologna, thick cut or leftover slices, run it through a grinder or chop it by hand, then mix it with mayonnaise, sweet relish, and maybe some mustard if you liked a little zip. The resulting spread was scooped onto a leaf of butter lettuce, arranged on a plate with a couple of pickles, and served cold with slices of white bread or a few crackers on the side. This was not the same as a Bologna sandwich you slapped together in a hurry. This was the dressed-up version, the dinner version. And for a lot of families in the 1950s and 1960s, it was enough to make the evening feel just a little more put together. Iced coffee or sweet tea on the side made it feel like a full meal. It might sound modest now, but it filled bellies and made do with what was on hand. People were proud of their spreads. Some added chopped celery. Others blended in boiled eggs or diced pickles. Every house had its twist. The first is egg cream. When you get past the fact that there's no egg or cream in this beverage, you'll realize just how tasty this New York fountain beverage is. It's made by mixing cold milk, fizzy seltzer, and chocolate syrup in a tall glass. Let's just say that if you get it right, a glass of egg cream should have a foamy head that looks similar to blowing bubbles into chocolate milk with a straw. The drink is believed to have been created in the early 20th century, with its origins often credited to Louis Oster in Brooklyn, a Jewish candy store owner. As the story goes, it sold up to 3,000 glasses a day, but he died with his secret recipe. Imagine drinking this on a hot summer day. Now you understand why we should bring this back. It's such a sweet treat. Speaking of sweets, let's move on to our next forgotten summer food, beans and franks. Cheese, sausage, and croissant strata is this really comforting brunch dish that actually works amazingly for potlucks. It works because it's the perfect little starter to bring to a party. Most people already know who's going to be bringing what, and there are designated people who bring the really heavy-hitter dishes. That leaves people who really need to nail the sides, appetizers, and desserts. For them, this dish was literally a no-compromise sort of thing. It was absolutely impossible to have a potluck without somebody bringing over a croissant strata, especially if you lived in the openly French neighborhoods. Sorry, by that I mean the ones who would cook nothing else but French food. Strata has lots of layers, especially in Italy, where they take the attention to detail super seriously. Traditional strata recipes make use of sliced bread, baguettes, croissants, and all kinds of other things. This dish was experimented with a lot while it was becoming a big thing in America, so you had people all over the country doing their own version of a strata. Lots of people played around with the kinds of cheeses you could use, or they would switch out the sausages for some other meat. Either way, it was a wonderful little bread-based dish to serve as a filler until the next big meal. Cheesy ham chowder. This creamy soup is a winter wonderland in a bowl. Imagine tender chunks of ham in a rich and creamy broth, loaded with potatoes, carrots, and other colorful vegetables. The secret weapon of this chowder? The generous amount of melty cheese takes the flavor to a whole new level. This soup is like your best friend on snow days. It's also a great way to use up leftover ham from the holidays. Just be careful not to burn your tongue. This cheesy chowder is addictive. This dish might sound fancy, but don't let the French name fool you. Chicken a la king is a creamy and delicious casserole that's surprisingly easy to make. Yeah, tender chicken pieces in a rich cream sauce with mushrooms, peas, and pimientos? Count me in! This casserole is typically served over rice or toast and is a reminder that classics never truly goes out of style. It's just not as popular as it was back in the day because you know what they say, all good things come to an end. But chicken a la king doesn't have to. It's too good to become a memory of the past. So, next time you're looking for a nostalgic and delicious meal, give this dish a try. So did any of these classic beloved dinners stir up tasty memories? If so, like this video, click subscribe, and stay tuned for more nostalgia trips. Acorn bread was a really nutty bread that was made from loads of ground acorns. Now, I don't know about you, but acorns sound like the next best thing to me when walnuts aren't around. Native American tribes are definitely different because boy did they love their acorns, especially in California and the eastern woodlands. Now, let's give some credit to the crop itself. It's pretty damn adaptable. It grows in most kinds of soil. It's really easy to care for and is overall low maintenance, so you don't have to worry about messing it up much. Plus, grinding it into flour is a pretty cathartic process for some. I mean, if you've ever crushed together spices, then you probably know what I'm talking about, you know? Acorns were so available that almost every tribe had access to them. And that was largely because Native Americans truly cared for their oak trees, with most tribes adhering to the sentiment. Foil-wrapped burger pouches with mushrooms and onions were a low-maintenance grilling hack that felt like you discovered a backyard cheat code. You would shape your burger patties, load them into foil with sliced mushrooms, onions, maybe a slice of cheese, and seal it all tight before tossing it on the grill. No flipping, no mess, no burgers falling apart. The foil handled everything, steaming the veggies and keeping the patties juicy. Families in the 60s and 70s loved this trick, especially at big cookouts where juggling 10 things on the grill was guaranteed chaos. The mushrooms soaked up smoky flavor, the onions caramelized just right, and your burger came out cooked to perfection every time. Plus, cleanup was a breeze, which made parents even happier. You would spot these foil-wrapped pouches stacked on picnic tables next to chips and pasta salad, a little backyard secret that always delivered. But these days, they have quietly disappeared from summer barbecues, replaced by trendier, more complicated meals. Funny how the simplest tricks often get left behind. Cold salmon loaf with cucumber sauce looked like something from a buffet table but was made with canned fish and scraps. You flaked the salmon, canned if fresh was too much, then mixed it with breadcrumbs, eggs, lemon juice, and seasoning before shaping it into a loaf and baking. Once cooled, it was sliced and served cold, usually with a cucumber sauce made from sour cream or mayo and finely chopped cucumber. This dish showed up often in the 1950s and 1960s cookbooks, especially in regions where summer meant heat and no one wanted the stove on. Cold dinners were in. Molded ones were even better. You could make it early, chill it, and slice it up at dinner time without breaking a sweat. It was elegant in its own quiet way. Some added celery or pickles, others kept it smooth. Either way, it answered the question of what to eat when the heat made everything else unbearable. Now, let's roll into our next tasty 1970s treat, the berry compote. This dish consists of fresh or frozen berries cooked down with a bit of sugar and sometimes a splash of lemon juice, creating a sweet, tangy sauce perfect for topping ice cream, pancakes, or yogurt. Some variations included a dash of vanilla or a hint of cinnamon for added depth of flavor. Families loved it for breakfast, dessert, or even as a snack, making the most of summer's berry bounty. The bright colors and luscious texture of berry compote made it a visual and taste sensation, perfect for impressing guests or enjoying with the family. Antipasto skewers are another appetizer that have gotten really popular. They're the definition of Italian sides, and the word antipasto itself comes from the word ante and pastus. The literal translation? Before meal. Whether you have this as an appetizer or a side, it's definitely one of the best ones you'll ever try in both regards. Traditionally, in Italy, this is the first course you start with. In America, it happened to land in our lives right around the time people started serving all kinds of finger foods. The whole trend of convenience food culture would actually spread to all kinds of places and invent new styles of dishes we didn't think were possible, and finger foods were one of them. These bite-sized foods fit perfectly with the kind of side that antipasto skewers were, and the two went together like butter and toast. Biscuits and sausage gravy. Okay. This southern staple might still be a thing in some parts of the country, but let's be real, biscuits and sausage gravy is definitely not dominating breakfast menus anymore. I guess waffles are to blame for that. But this breakfast legend is the perfect combination of fluffy buttermilk biscuits so light and airy they practically melt in your mouth, along with a creamy sausage gravy, rich with savory sausage and speckled with black pepper. This is a breakfast, or hey, no judgment here, even a dinner combination that's pure comfort food heaven. From the perfect hangover cure to a delicious weekend treat, biscuits and sausage gravy satisfy all cravings. Just maybe lay off the white clothes while you're indulging. That sausage gravy can be a bit enthusiastic when it comes to staining. Three Sisters stew is a really traditional Native American dish that's made mostly from corn, beans, and different kinds of squash. It's called Three Sisters because it involves these three mainstream indigenous crops. They actually made up a significant part of the culture, you know? The stew was something that was common among loads of tribes like the Cherokee and Haudenosaunee. It was made with wild herbs and seasonings too, and some people even threw in venison, rabbit or turkey if they could get their hands on some. Now, mind you, pine nut soup was something that wouldn't last a day in modern times, but was all the rage back then, even outside of the indigenous communities. Pine nuts were considered such a staple food for so many different indigenous tribes, particularly throughout the Southwest and the Great Basin regions. They were tribes like the Apache, Hopi, and Navajo, to name a few. They all relied on pune nuts for two things: their exceptionally buttery and rich taste, and their incredible amount of fat content. Pine nuts were traditionally just gathered from the branches of piñón pine trees, and they were always roasted for easy amounts of shelling. Then, they would be ground into a nutrient-dense paste, and one of the most common ways to do that was to consume them in this rich soup that could be eaten alone or mixed with other kinds of dried meats and cornmeal or wild greens. Pine nuts are something that would basically be made in a broth that would be based either around the local game of the day or the vegetables that were available. Then, optional thickeners such as cornmeal and ground mesquite beans were something that were dearly beloved. Wild herbs were something that were considered optional, but most people honestly always added them, at least across the recipes I can find. It was sustainable, long-lasting, and the pine nuts could also last a tribe months if they were kept properly. They were a rich source of protein, magnesium, and vitamin E as well. Honey-glazed grilled Spam burgers were proof that even humble ingredients could shine with a little backyard ingenuity. Spam was still riding high in post-war America, and families were not shy about slicing it thick, tossing it on the grill, and brushing it with honey for that perfect salty sweet finish. These burgers were budget-friendly, easy to make, and surprisingly delicious. The grill added that smoky char, the honey caramelized on top, and suddenly you had a sandwich that felt a lot fancier than its price tag. You would see them at park cookouts, summer picnics, and neighborhood potlucks, often sandwiched between toasted buns with lettuce and maybe a little mustard if you were lucky. Spam might get a bad rap today, but back then, it was practically a grilling essential for families who knew how to stretch a dollar and still enjoy the weekend. Somewhere along the way, the honey-glazed Spam burger fell off the map, replaced by flashier, pricier options. But anyone who remembers biting into one of these knows it deserves a second chance on the grill. This one might raise some eyebrows today, but back in the day, pork chops with rhubarb compote were about as close to gourmet as summer dinners got. You would sear the chops in a cast-iron skillet, brown them up good, and then serve them with a sauce made from stewed rhubarb, vinegar, and a little sugar if you had any to spare. The result? Sweet, tangy, juicy, and warm. Rhubarb was a big deal back then, especially in areas where the plant grew wild or right in someone's backyard. If you had a patch, you had dinner. This recipe showed up in a lot of cookbooks because it was reliable. Even tough cuts of meat got elevated with enough rhubarb sauce on top. It was common to serve it with a scoop of mashed potatoes or white bread to soak up the juices. Not everyone liked the sharp bite of rhubarb, especially kids, but the grown-ups appreciated its practicality. It kept well, cooked fast, and paired perfectly with pork. Some versions added cloves or nutmeg. Others threw in onions or swapped the rhubarb for stewed apples when the season passed. Either way, this dish captured the feeling of summer dinners cooked low and slow with whatever you had on hand. Frog eye salad, on the other hand, is something that came right out of the middle half of the 20th century. Now, I'm not too sure where people really got this one from. I mean, you'd think it came right from some community shacked up outside a swamp. Strangely enough, no frogs were harmed in the making of this plate of food. Instead, there's this specific kind of pasta they use. It's called acini di pepe, and it's this really small, almost bubbly-looking pasta that apparently has a pretty striking similarity to frog eyes once you cook it and bring all of it together. Now, a typical frog eye salad takes this pasta, puts in some whipped cream, pineapples, oranges, and coconut, and then it's chilled. You kind of want to picture something similar to tapioca or the texture of boba. It's a pretty unique dish, and if you start going through some cookbooks that had their peak sales during the 1950s, you'll definitely find this. For two reasons. One, it was just one of the most perfect salads to go with your potluck. Two, potluck culture as a whole was really on the rise. So chicken paprikash is a Hungarian dish that sounds fancy, but is basically a party in a pot for your taste buds. Imagine juicy chicken pieces slow-cooked with tender onions in a creamy sauce, bursting with the warm, smoky flavor of paprika. It's served with a side of fluffy rice or noodles. Chicken paprikash really found its footing back when Chinese takeout wasn't as big of a thing. You know, back when Grandma used to put on the apron and cook for us? This dish really was the one-pot wonder. Bonus points. If your grandma used to whip this up for you, that nostalgia factor is real. A version of it still exists in Bulgarian cuisine in case you crave the it now. The Bulgarians are a little light on the paprika and center the dish on sautéed onions. You sooner. Native American preparations of stuffed roast duck usually included some common themes like wild rice, corn and beans, acorns, and nuts, but it varied region by region. What really makes this such a standout recipe for dinners is that it is quite literally an entire stuffed duck. This is also something you need such as minimal appliances for making. It can be its own little day too. So, if you're feeling like calling a friend over and brushing up your cooking skills over the weekend, this might be a good idea. The stuffing is also not something you need to worry about too much because it's not that hard to make. In California and the Southwest, ground acorns and pine nuts had a long tradition of being thickened into stuffing, and this was usually for pies, but the Native American lamb might seem like a fancy restaurant thing these days, but back in the day it was a total dinnertime MVP. Lamb stew was a fan favorite at dinner parties back in the day, and I get the hype. Imagine the combination of melt-in-your-mouth lamb and an assortment of colorful vegetables like carrots, potatoes, and peas simmered in a rich, flavorful broth just begging to be soaked with some crusty bread. This is a dish that's guaranteed to warm you up from the inside out on a chilly day. Not to mention, it's surprisingly easy to make. Perfect for those nights when you want a delicious meal without spending hours in the kitchen. Just maybe don't tell your grandma you added a sprinkle of your favorite hot sauce. Some traditions are best left untouched. And then there was the hot dog salad. Those who have never tried these are missing out on something epic. Hot dog salad was an inventive twist on the classic barbecue. This dish features sliced hot dogs tossed with a mix of fresh vegetables like lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, and onions, all dressed in a tangy vinaigrette or creamy dressing. It emerged as a creative way to enjoy hot dogs beyond the traditional, making it a popular choice for those looking to jazz up their summer menus. The combination of hot dogs with crisp, fresh vegetables creates a tasty dish. It's one of those meals you prepare when you feel like experimenting with new stuff, and it never disappoints. The sweetness and saltiness of hot dogs make them a viable option for a salad. Hot dog stuffed grilled bell peppers were one of those quirky cookout ideas that somehow worked better than they had any right to. Picture halved bell peppers filled with chopped hot dogs, shredded cheese, relish, and maybe a little mustard, grilled until the peppers were tender and everything inside got warm and melty. It was part side dish, part main course, and all nostalgic backyard magic. This recipe showed up at family barbecues and neighborhood block parties, especially during the 70s and 80s when people loved turning simple ingredients into crowd pleasers. Peppers were cheap, hot dogs were everywhere, and cheese made it all feel extra special. Plus, stuffing veggies with other cookout favorites meant you could stretch your grocery haul farther without sacrificing flavor. Somewhere along the line, though, these stuffed peppers disappeared from the summer grill scene, replaced by more polished, less fun recipes. But anyone who remembers them knows they were the sneaky star of the picnic table, cheesy, smoky, and weirdly satisfying. Okay, cream spinach and pearl onions didn't look the most appetizing, but trust me, it was always a hit at family dinners. Think of a rich, creamy base packed with vibrant green spinach leaves. And let's not forget the star of the show, pearl onions, that added the perfect touch of sweetness. Not only was this dinner finger-licking delicious, but it was healthy too. Jam-packed with nutrients including vitamins A, C, and K, iron, folate, potassium, and a good amount of fiber. Just don't blame me if you get flashbacks to your school cafeteria. But hey, sometimes those cafeteria classics deserve a second chance, especially when they're this delicious and healthy all at the same time. Tell us which recipe you'd bring back in the comments, hit like and subscribe for more flavors too good to forget.